I never thought a birthday could feel like mourning, but that's what my 72nd was. Silent, stale, and heavy with grief I hadn't earned. The morning had started quiet. Too quiet. No ringing phone. No chirpy grandkids. Not even a knock on the door from a neighbor with day-old cupcakes. Just a single text from my son, one line long, buried beneath a photo of them all grinning under the Eiffel Tower. "I hope you don't mind, Mom. France has been a dream. We'll call when we're back." That was it. No, happy birthday. No, wish you were here. Just a digital shrug as they smiled in luxury, on my dime. I sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the cake I'd bought myself the night before, a small vanilla sponge with pink cursive icing that read, "To Mom, you matter." The words made my stomach twist. They felt like a joke now. The decorations were still up from when I'd tried to make the house look festive, like maybe someone would walk in and yell, "Surprise!" But the air was flat. The only sound was the ticking clock, mocking every minute they didn't call. I looked around the house. My house. Photos on the mantel. My late husband's hat, still hanging by the door. And the scent of lavender still clinging to the curtains. This was supposed to be the home I grew old in, surrounded by the family I'd spent my life protecting, feeding, and forgiving. And yet, here I was, alone on my birthday, and my children were sipping champagne in Nice with my retirement money. I pushed the cake away. It started to make sense now. The vague texts, the paperwork they'd rushed me to sign, calling it a gift authorization for their anniversary trip. My daughter-in-law, glossy and smiling, had handed me the folder weeks ago and said, "You don't need to read all of it. It's just a small permission slip, Mom. Nothing scary." I had trusted her. I had trusted them. And here I was, chewing bitterness with my morning coffee. They hadn't just stolen my birthday. They'd stolen my dignity, my financial security, my right to say no, and all with that one dry message. That one cold photo. I didn't cry. I wanted to. But I didn't. Instead, I reached for the envelope where I kept my pension stubs. I ran my fingers over the edge, then set it down. I didn't need to open it. I knew the truth. They loved my money more than me. And in that moment, I wasn't heartbroken. I was done. Done being their safety net. Done playing the grateful mother, who should smile and wave as her children strip everything she's worked for. Being alone is better than being used. The kitchen felt different now. Still quiet, but not helpless. I stood up, peeled the decorations down one by one, folded the banner that said, "Love you forever," and placed it in the drawer under the sink. They thought I was too old to notice, too soft to push back. They forgot one thing. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Weeks before that awful birthday, there had been a moment I should have questioned, but like most betrayals, it came dressed as love. It was a Sunday afternoon. My son Mark had dropped by with his wife Tanya. They brought pastries and fake smiles, the kind they save for photos and manipulation. Tanya poured tea, complimented the living room as if she hadn't grown up resenting its every cushion, and then pulled out a folder. "This is for your blessing, Mom," she said sweetly, sliding the paper across the table. "We're planning a small trip for our 10th anniversary. Mark thought it'd be nice to include your name as a symbolic gift." I remember hesitating. "What's this really about?" "Oh, just a little formality," she chirped. "A travel gift clause. It lets us book under a shared family fund for tax reasons. You know how these agencies can be." I looked at Mark, who nodded and said, "It's nothing, really. Just a signature. We figured you'd enjoy knowing you helped." The word helped softened me. I'd always helped. I'd paid for braces, tuition, down payments. They made it sound like a tradition, like love. So I signed. But I remember the way Tanya's eyes flickered, just for a second, like a mask slipping. And I remember the pen. It wasn't mine. She had brought it. One of those smooth silver ones. Expensive. Heavy in the hand. The kind people buy when they want things to look official. 2 days later, I tried checking my online bank account. Access denied. I thought it was a glitch. I tried again. Still locked out. I called Mark. and he answered like I was interrupting something important. "Oh, that's just temporary, Mom. Tanya's consolidating some things for the trip. Don't worry, you'll be added back in. We're just streamlining." Streamlining. That word kept circling in my head, like a drain. I didn't tell anyone. Not at first. I didn't want to seem paranoid. I didn't want to believe it was deliberate. But it was. That travel gift form had given them access, not just to a family fund, but to my entire retirement account. A line item buried in legal language had authorized them as temporary custodians. Tanya, who always smiled too wide when money was mentioned, was now the keyholder. And I was locked out of my own life. I tried to downplay it in my mind. Maybe it was temporary. Maybe they'd pay it back. But then Tanya texted me a photo. Her in a white robe, glass of champagne in hand, legs crossed by a marble bathtub that probably cost more than my monthly pension. "No regrets," the caption read, with a winking emoji. No regrets. Not even a thank you. I sat there, phone in hand, heart thudding. Not from shock, from recognition. This wasn't new. This was just the first time they'd taken so much at once. And something in me stilled. The kind of still that comes before a storm. I set the phone down and whispered out loud, "You just showed me who you are." They thought I wouldn't fight. They hadn't counted on what I'd do when I finally woke up. A few days after the money vanished, I heard the sound of rolling suitcases outside my window. I looked through the lace curtains, careful not to be seen. There they were, Mark, Tanya, and their 2 kids, all dressed in matching travel sweatshirts that said Paris Squad, glossy luggage stacked on the curb, a black Uber idling out front. Tanya was directing everything like a movie director. "No, sweetie, that bag goes with the carry-on. Be gentle, it's designer." Designer. Paid for with my savings, no doubt. Mark didn't even glance at the house. I stood behind the curtain, waiting. One wave, one nod, some acknowledgement that the woman who scrubbed his vomit out of baby blankets and pawned her wedding ring to pay for his braces was right there, watching. But there was nothing. He kissed his wife, pulled out his phone, and climbed into the Uber without so much as lifting his eyes toward the window. That's when it clicked for me. It wasn't that he forgot. It was that he didn't care if I saw. I stood there in my old slippers, heart thudding against a chest that had spent too many years softening every blow. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the lie. It was the insult. You can forgive a thief, but you never forget being treated like a ghost while they walk off with your life. I watched the car pull away, watched Tanya post a photo of her designer luggage in the back seat with the caption, "Let the luxury begin." And then, 2 minutes later, one final text landed on my phone. From Mark. "Check in when we land. Love you." No punctuation, no emoji, not even a real goodbye. Just administration. I didn't reply. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water with trembling hands, and sat back down at the table, still decorated with the birthday streamers I'd foolishly hung 2 days earlier. I should have taken them down by now, but somehow the cruelty of them being there made the betrayal feel more real, more vivid. That was the thing with Mark. He always found a way to make his abandonment feel casual, unavoidable, like it was my fault for expecting anything different. I used to defend him when people said he was selfish. "He's just busy," I'd say. "He's tired. It's a tough economy." But this time, there was no excuse. Not even a good lie. They had taken my money, stolen my trust, and walked away like I was a forgotten address. And maybe that's what I had become to them. Just a location. Just a house where you pick up checks and leave your kids during errands. But I wasn't forgotten. Not to myself. That afternoon, I went outside and watered the plants for the first time in weeks. The soil was cracked, the hydrangeas limp. But as I pressed the hose into the roots, I felt something shift. I remembered who I was. I was the woman who worked 40 years without taking a vacation. The woman who buried a husband, raised a son, paid off a mortgage, and still had enough in her to bake cookies for ungrateful grandchildren. And the woman they underestimated. They thought they could fly off to France with my money and come home to a clean house, smiling mother, and silent forgiveness. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was done waiting at the window. It was a Thursday night. I remember because I had just finished folding towels when the television blared a segment that stopped me cold. Beware of silent scams, the reporter warned, especially involving elderly guardianship and forged property transfers. I stood frozen, one towel still half folded in my lap. The screen flashed examples: fake signatures, power of attorney slips, elderly people finding out too late that their assets had been quietly signed away. Something buzzed in the back of my skull. I walked to the computer desk, pulled the chair out slowly and sat down. I hadn't logged into my online banking since that strange lockout weeks ago. I tried again. Denied. Again. Denied. Access restricted. Contact your administrator. Administrator? I clicked into the deed registry next. The county had a new portal now, and it took me 15 minutes to navigate it. When the page finally loaded, my breath caught. Owner, Tanya C. Fields. My daughter-in-law's name, not mine, not ours, just hers. On my house. I stared at the screen, willing it to change, to correct itself, to call it a mistake. But it didn't. It just sat there in sterile font, black and white and brutal. She had transferred my house. Without telling me. I reached for the drawer and pulled out every document I'd signed that month. The travel gift form wasn't there. Tanya had taken it with her, claiming she needed it to finalize the reservations. I should have known. I pressed my fingers to my temples and closed my eyes. A deep, pressing silence filled the room. Not peaceful, suffocating. Like the walls were listening. For a moment, I imagined her voice, that chirpy, fake polite tone. It's just for ease of planning, Gloria. You've got so much to manage. We figured we'd handle the paperwork. I had nodded. I had trusted. I had been too tired to read the fine print. And now, my home, the home I'd scrubbed after chemo, painted alone after Mark left for college, the one where my husband died holding my hand, was legally no longer mine. I stood up, the towel forgotten on the floor. There was no one to tell, no one who'd believe it wasn't my choice. It had all looked so clean. So cooperative, the kind of betrayal that wears a silk scarf and calls itself help. I turned off the TV. I couldn't sleep that night. I just sat in the recliner, blanket draped across my knees, eyes wide in the dark. They thought I was stupid, that I wouldn't check, that I'd quietly fade into a corner of the house, their house now, and keep baking pies like everything was fine. But they forgot who built this life. Who paid every mortgage, every tax bill, every repair after the storm. I may have been quiet, but I wasn't blind anymore. So I reached for a yellow legal pad and wrote down one sentence. Check county deed with clerk. Ask about forged transfer reversal. The next morning, I put on my good coat and my walking shoes. My legs shook, but not from age, from purpose. They wanted everything I had, but they were about to learn something they never expected. I still had my name, and I still knew how to use it. The community center smelled like dust and old books, just the way I remembered it from the years I used to volunteer at the bake sales. I hadn't been back in a while, not since before my knees gave out, but that morning I walked in like I belonged. Because I did, and fate, or maybe something more deliberate, led me straight to May. She was sitting alone near the corner window, a paper Sudoku in one hand and a peppermint tea in the other. Her hair was still pinned the same way it was in 1984 when we both ran the neighborhood safety committee. Back then, she could charm a room and terrify a city inspector all in the same breath. I hadn't seen her in years. She hadn't aged, just sharpened. "Gloria," she said, looking up, her voice low but clear. Well, I'll be damned. I sat down without asking, my fingers wrapped around the lukewarm teacup. She slid across the table without a word. She didn't need one. She could tell something was wrong. "I think they took my house," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "And I think they think I won't fight." Her eyes didn't blink. She just nodded, slowly, like she'd seen this before. Maybe she had. "Let me guess," she said. They used a gift form or a living trust addendum. My stomach dropped. A travel gift clause, Tanya called it. I didn't read it close enough. Just signed. May clicked her tongue. Classic. Soft scam. They file it quietly, shift the deed, call it temporary. For logistics. And by the time you realize it, it's legal enough to look real but messy enough to fight. I didn't realize I was shaking until she reached across the table and steadied my hand with hers. Here's the thing they don't count on, she said, her voice going just a notch lower. They don't expect you to have friends who used to notarize police reports and divorce filings for a living. I blinked. You were a notary? 37 years, she said, sipping her tea. Retired now, but I still know where the paperwork lives. And more importantly, I know how to spot a forgery. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled. Not because everything was fixed, but because I wasn't alone. We talked for an hour. May told me what to bring, what to request, who to avoid at the county clerk's office, because she'll call Tanya the second you leave. She pulled a napkin from her purse and wrote down names. Then she paused, looked me in the eye, and said something I didn't expect. You're not weak, Gloria. They just counted on your silence. Break that, and they've got nothing. I nodded, swallowed hard, and whispered, They think I'm still baking cookies. May laughed. Let them think that. Just make sure the oven's empty when they come looking. I left that center with nothing but a napkin in my pocket and a fire in my chest. For the first time since the text on my birthday, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a witness. And a woman who was finally going to testify. The county office smelled like waxed linoleum and old coffee. It hadn't changed since I last renewed my driver's license back when Mark still needed me to fill out his tax forms. I wore my nicest cardigan that day, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I needed to feel like the woman I used to be, the one who could stand up straight in a courthouse lobby and be taken seriously. May had warned me, ask for Sylvia, avoid Pam. Sylvia has a brother in construction. She's seen things. Pam's a gossip. Don't give her ammunition. I waited in line, behind a man arguing over a traffic fine, and a woman cradling a crying baby. When it was my turn, I stepped forward and said simply, I'd like to see the most recent deed on file for my home address, please. I believe there may have been an error. Sylvia didn't ask questions. She just nodded and typed slowly. When she printed the form and slid it across the desk, her fingers paused. Barely. But I saw it. A flicker of recognition, a wrinkle in her brow. She looked at me. Soft, but serious. You used to be on the church board, right? With Pastor Jim? I nodded. For almost 10 years. She leaned forward slightly. Voice low. I remember you. You used to host the pie auctions. You're sharp. You don't miss details. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just waited. She pointed to the printed deed. Tanya C. Fields. Transfer via authorized custodial designation. Filed 3 weeks ago. Power of attorney form used for legal execution. I stared at the signature. It was mine. Sort of. But I knew my handwriting. This one had too much curve. Too much swirl. Like someone trying to make it look grandmotherly. It was a copy of me. But not me. I felt my breath catch. Can this be reversed? Sylvia glanced to the side. The room was busy, but her voice dropped anyway. That depends. If you contest it and prove coercion or lack of understanding, it becomes fraud. But that requires proof. A notary statement helps. A handwriting sample. Anything that shows you didn't sign with full knowledge. I opened my purse and pulled out a photo of the actual travel form Tanya had sent me as a confirmation. She'd texted it with a smiling emoji, as if to say, Isn't this cute? Sylvia took it, studied the image on my phone, and her lips tightened. She filed this as power of attorney, she said. Not a gift. That's misrepresentation. And you weren't declared medically unfit, which means it was forged, I finished. She didn't nod. But she didn't have to. She printed another sheet, slipped it under the desk divider discreetly, and said, If someone were hypothetically preparing to contest a property transfer, this is the form they'd use. I took it without a word. As I turned to leave, Sylvia called after me, softly, so no one else would hear. "Miss Harlan?" I turned. "Don't wait too long. These things, they get messier the longer they sit." I nodded once, tightly. "I'm not waiting anymore." Outside, the wind cut sharp through my coat, but I barely felt it. Because now I had it in black and white. They didn't just trick me, they stole from me. And they'd signed my name to the theft. They thought I'd never find out. But I had the truth now. And May's napkin in my purse. And a legal form clutched in my hand like a weapon they never saw coming. The cafe on 4th and Juniper had been my safe place for years. Small, quiet, no music, just the hum of ceiling fans and the occasional clink of ceramic cups. I went there that Tuesday because I needed a place to think. I brought the papers with me, tucked into an old envelope, and ordered my usual peppermint tea. I was halfway through reading the legal definitions of constructive fraud when I heard them. 2 booths over. Young voices. 1 male, 1 female. Laughing. Loud in the way that only people without fear can be. And then Tanya said, the man was chuckling, "She'll never know. We've already got the keys, and she still thinks we're on vacation." I froze. The tea burned my lip. I didn't move my head, but my ears sharpened. "She's just sitting there in that old house like it's still hers," the girl said, biting into what sounded like a biscotti. "Once the sale clears, we're done." I told Mark to be quick about it. My hands started to shake. Mark. My son's name, leaving a stranger's mouth. I turned just enough to catch a glimpse. Mark's old college friend, Kyle, and some young woman with bleached curls and big sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. I recognized her vaguely. Tanya's cousin, maybe? Kyle was scrolling through his phone, laughing again. "Man, once they sell that house, you two are golden. She's still got cash left, right?" "Oh yeah," the woman said, sipping her drink. "But that's phase 2. Retirement home transfer. They've already got the paperwork started." "Retirement home?" My grip tightened on the edge of the table. My tea had gone cold. My blood colder. So that was their plan. Move me out. Seal the sale. Cash in. Like I was just furniture that needed to be cleared before the open house. I stood up slowly, carefully gathering my papers. My legs felt stiff, like my knees might give out. But I walked to the counter and smiled at the girl ringing up lattes. "Can I borrow a pen?" I asked. Sweet as pie. She handed me one without a word. I returned to my table and wrote a single sentence on the back of the legal envelope. "They are preparing to move me without consent." Then I slid it into my purse, left a tip, and walked out like nothing had happened. But inside, something final had shifted. They weren't just greedy. They were preparing to erase me, and they were laughing about it in public. Like I was a joke, an obstacle, a footnote in the story of their new, shinier lives. I walked home without crying. I'd done that already. Now I was focused. Because now I knew it wasn't just about money. It was about power. They thought they had mine. They forgot who taught them how to fight in the first place. The letter came folded twice in a plain envelope. No return address, just my name in perfect print. Not even cursive. Just the kind of font you use when you want something to feel medical. Or final. Inside, it said the retirement facility had confirmed a preliminary placement, and that I would be assisted into temporary transitional housing later that month. No date. No visit. No phone call. Just a quiet erasure set in motion with bureaucracy. They planned to move me while I was napping. It was Tanya's specialty. Really. Doing things behind your back while smiling to your face. She probably called it a soft transition. She probably used words like streamline and safety. But what it really was disposal. They didn't even give me a chance to argue. I sat there at the kitchen table, letter in hand, birthday banner still rolled up in the trash can behind me, and felt that familiar surge of shame they'd taught me to carry. Then I picked up the phone. May answered on the second ring. "They're moving you?" she said, no surprise in her voice, only steel. "Yes." "When?" "Soon." Without telling me. May didn't say much. She just breathed into the phone once, slow and even. "I'm calling Walter," she said. Walter, the retired officer from 2 blocks down, used to handle estate disputes and elder fraud cases before his heart gave out, and he traded his badge for gardening gloves. That same evening, he knocked on my door with a folder in hand and a grim smile. "May said you're being targeted. Show me the letter." I did. He read it once, then again, then pulled out a different set of papers. "They're using a clause I've seen before, fraudulently activated guardianship. All they need is a doctor's note and a claim of quote-quote confusion. The retirement home doesn't question it. They're not legally obligated to." "I'm not confused," I said, my voice shaking. "I know," Walter said, looking me in the eye. "But you're vulnerable, and that's all they need." He slid a new form across the table. "We're revoking their authority, immediately. Power of attorney, any medical proxy, any deed assignment. You're taking it all back. Today." And I did. It took 30 minutes, just a few signatures. But with every line I crossed and re-signed, I felt myself returning to my own life. Line by line, name by name. The next morning, I walked 2 blocks down with a small bag of clothes and a toothbrush. May's guest room was waiting. "I'm not hiding," I told her as I stepped inside. "No," she said, "you're positioning." That week, we filed every correction. Walter hand-delivered the fraud claims. May notarized each document with the precision of a woman who'd once done it in court. I called my late husband's lawyer, James Delacroix, and within an hour, he had pulled up the old files I'd nearly forgotten existed: joint ownership, marriage affidavits, legacy clauses. Everything Tanya had ignored when she falsified my signature. "You've got a case," James said. "And more than that, you've got leverage." But I didn't want court. I wanted control. I wanted silence to turn to strategy. And I wanted to see the look on their faces when they came home to a different house. Because if they thought I'd napped through a heist, they'd forgotten who I really was. And soon, they'd remember. I hadn't spoken to James Delacroix in nearly 5 years, not since the funeral. But when he picked up, he sounded like he'd been waiting for me. "Gloria," he said, calm and clear. "I thought you might call one day." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. He'd known my husband for decades, back when people still bought homes with handshakes, and loyalty meant something. James had always liked me more than he liked Mark, though he never said it out loud. It was in the way he always handed the papers to me first. "I need help," I said. "Tell me everything," he replied. And I did. He didn't interrupt once. Not when I said Tanya forged my name. Not when I said the house had already been listed under hers. Not even when I told him they planned to relocate me while I napped. He listened like a man measuring every word for its legal weight. When I finished, there was a pause. Then, "We're going to undo every inch of it, quietly, but completely." James didn't waste time. He faxed over a power of attorney revocation form, scheduled a remote notary, and arranged a document courier to my new temporary address, May's cozy yellow cottage, where I now slept better than I had in months. He guided me through every line. "Initial here, sign here. Don't touch that box, it's a trap." It took 3 days. 3 days of forms, notarized statements, updated will amendments, and a fresh declaration of competency signed by my physician. May drove me to the clinic herself and waited in the lobby with a crossword while I passed the evaluation with ease. "She's not confused," the doctor said, glancing at my file. "She's angry." And she was right. By Friday, James had everything filed. The house deed transfer was officially contested, the power of attorney was nullified, and my financial access restored. Every locked account, every forgotten password, James helped me rebuild it brick by brick. When I opened my banking portal and saw my pension again, untouched, glowing like a beacon, I smiled. They hadn't drained it. Not yet. Because Tanya, for all her cruelty, was still methodical. She liked to steal things in stages. First access, then control, then the cash. But now, the lock was back in my hands. And then James asked the one question I hadn't expected. "Do you want to press charges?" I sat there a long time. The word charges felt cold, sharp, but what I said was even colder. Not yet. Because revenge wasn't the goal. Clarity was. I wanted them to come home and feel the shift. I wanted them to walk through that door and realize they weren't in charge anymore. James understood. He didn't push. "We'll hold the evidence," he said, "but everything is signed, sealed, and time-stamped. If they challenge you, they lose. If they retaliate, they incriminate themselves." He paused. "Gloria, I don't say this lightly, but you've built the most thorough, quiet war I've ever seen." I laughed then. The kind of dry, satisfied laugh I hadn't heard from myself in years. Because it wasn't a war. It was a correction. And the final stroke of it hadn't even happened yet. I found the cottage on a Tuesday afternoon. A tiny, crooked roof thing with peeling blue shutters and ivy choking half the porch. The kind of place most people overlook. But I didn't need perfect. I needed private. The landlord, a wiry old man named Hank, didn't ask many questions. Just looked me over once and said, "You look like someone who pays on time." "I do," I said. And just like that, I had a new address. 2 blocks from the home that used to be mine. Close enough to watch, far enough to breathe. It only took a few days to move. I didn't take much. Just the things that mattered. My husband's old flannel shirt, the brass candlesticks from our wedding, 2 framed photos, and the ceramic bowl Mark made in 3rd grade when he still brought me dandelions instead of legal threats. Everything else I left behind. Let them deal with the furniture. Let Tanya scrub her conscience with lemon polish and pretend she earned it all. May helped me set up the essentials. A toaster. A little table by the window. We hung a wind chime outside, the kind that sings in the wind like it remembers who you are. And then came the paperwork. Every hour, a new form. James revised my will. May notarized it. Walter hand-delivered copies to the local clerk, the credit union, and the title office. One by one, I clawed my life back. The deed? Pending reversal. The accounts? Mine again. And now? Power of attorney? Assigned to myself, formally, legally, and irrevocably. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't someone's liability. I was my own guardian. I remember sitting on the porch of that little cottage the day the last form was filed. The sun was just starting to set, painting everything gold. I sipped peppermint tea and watched the shadows stretch long across the lawn. It felt like a beginning. They hadn't noticed yet. Still posting photos from France. Tanya in a poolside robe. Mark holding up a glass of wine. The kids playing near some historic landmark I couldn't pronounce. Smiling. Relaxed. Oblivious. Good. Because by the time they landed, nothing would be as they left it. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I didn't want drama. I wanted documentation. Boundaries. Closure. They thought I was baking pies and folding towels. But what I was doing, quietly, methodically, was building a fortress. Every bank contact was updated. Every digital password changed. Every hint of their access erased. The house might have looked like theirs on paper for a while, but not anymore. Now, it was mine again. Or at least in the legal process of becoming mine again. James had filed the fraud contestation just before the window closed, citing forged signature evidence, mismatched handwriting analysis, and lack of proper witness certification. It was ironclad. And while the paperwork ground slowly through the county system, I waited. Not in fear, in peace. Because sometimes revenge doesn't come loud. Sometimes it comes with wind chimes and hot tea and the soft clink of your own keys in a new door. I wasn't hiding anymore. The deed had officially been reverted the previous Friday, stamped and filed, with Tanya's forged authority formally nullified. The final piece of the mess they made, corrected by my name in full. Gloria E. Harlan. I hadn't seen it written on a deed since 1997, when my husband and I paid off the final mortgage check and toasted with boxed wine in the living room. And now, after all this time, my name was back where it belonged. The real estate agent, a sharp, unfussy woman named Nicole, didn't ask many questions. She came to the cottage, looked me in the eye, and said, "I've seen this before. Quiet women don't stay quiet forever." The house went on the market under my name, the correct name. And because the neighborhood had changed so much since we bought it, it barely sat for a day. Multiple offers came in within hours. Cash bids. Over asking. People wanted the lawn, the garage, the sunlight from the east-facing bedroom. Tanya once mocked for feeling too old lady. I picked the buyer who sent a handwritten letter. A single dad with 2 girls. Said he wanted a house where the floor didn't creak with bad memories. Perfect. James handled the legal transfer. I watched from my porch as he sent the documents through. Nicole called me later that night and said, "It's done." The next day, the final box left the house. Just one. A box I hadn't packed myself. The movers found it in the attic. A dusty, half-torn bin labeled Gloria Keep. Inside was my wedding veil, the clay heart ornament Mark made in kindergarten, and a Polaroid of me in the backyard, arms covered in flour, laughing. They must have missed it when they cleared the attic to make room for Tanya's meditation corner. I kept it. That photo reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten: joy before obligation. By the time I walked back to the house one last time, keys in hand, purse light, I didn't feel sad. I felt released. I turned the knob, opened every window, let the wind rush through the empty rooms one final time. No tears, no speeches, just the quiet power of knowing I'd undone what they tried to make permanent. They were still overseas, still tagging themselves in boutique shops and rooftop restaurants. They hadn't called once, didn't even ask how the transition was going. But I was sure of one thing: they hadn't checked the deed again. Not yet. Because if they had, they'd know what was coming. That they weren't coming home to the same house. That they weren't coming home to my silence. I closed the door, twisted the lock, and slipped the key into the envelope for the new owner. Then I walked away with nothing in my hands, and everything that mattered, finally, in my name again. The day they returned, I was already waiting. Not in the driveway, not in the house, but across the street, hidden in the sunroom of my neighbor's house. Maze, of course. She brewed chamomile while I sipped slowly, eyes fixed on the front yard I no longer owned. At exactly 4:12 p.m., the Uber pulled up. Mark stepped out first, sunglasses still on, dragging a suitcase that looked too new, too clean. Tanya followed, snapping gum, her designer purse looped lazily on her arm. The kids bickered behind them, the older one swiping at the younger's phone. They looked like tourists in their own lives. Tanya approached the door, pulled out her keys with a flourish, and jabbed one into the lock. It didn't turn. She tried again. Nothing. I leaned forward slightly in my seat, breath caught somewhere between thrill and fury. From behind the glass, May whispered, "Wait for it." Mark stepped up, tried his own key. Still nothing. The look on his face, first confusion, then irritation, then a slow curl of disbelief, was something I would remember for the rest of my life. Tanya knocked hard. No answer. She banged again. The lawn hadn't been trimmed in weeks. The porch light bulb was missing. The flower boxes were gone. Mark pulled out his phone and dialed someone. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what he was about to discover. I imagined the voicemail from James, the gentle but firm tone. "This is a legal courtesy notice. As of last week, the property formerly registered to Tanya C. Fields is no longer under her name. The house was sold, clean and uncontested, by its rightful owner, Gloria E. Harlan." I watched Tanya's face crumple in real time. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Mark was pacing now, phone to his ear, jaw tight. The kids had gone quiet. No one moved to sit. No one asked what was happening. They knew. Tanya shouted then, something sharp, something too loud. Mark turned on her, angry, frustrated, and for a second, I could almost see the boy he used to be. The one who used to cry when his kite wouldn't fly, who once brought me a dandelion and called it gold, but he wasn't that boy now. He was a man staring at a house he thought he owned, and realizing he had nothing. No key, no title, no power. They stood there for a long while, just standing. Then Tanya dropped her bag. She was crying now. Loud, messy sobs that echoed off the porch I once swept every Sunday morning. Mark said something, too soft to hear, but it made her scream. She pushed him hard, stormed off toward the sidewalk. The Uber hadn't left yet. She waved it down. Got in. Didn't wait for him. Mark stood alone on the porch of a house that wasn't his. No one opened the door. No one came to explain. No one owed him anything. He slumped onto the steps and rubbed his face with both hands. And that's when I smiled. Not wide, not cruel, just quiet. Because it wasn't about revenge. It was about return, not theirs, mine. The first call came that night. I let it ring. Then came the texts. Mom, please. This isn't what it looks like. We can talk. I didn't know Tanya did all that. Just call me, please. I didn't answer. Not once. I blocked every number. Mark's, Tanya's, even the one the kids used to FaceTime with when they wanted cookies or cash. Every voice that once called me Mom, only after they'd drained me. I watched the call logs fill up from my porch, sipping tea, May beside me knitting a scarf I didn't need but welcomed anyway. By day 2, the messages shifted. You're being spiteful. We did this for your safety. You weren't thinking clearly. That one made me laugh. Loud, bitter. They'd gaslit me even now. After all the documents, all the deception, they still thought I'd question my clarity instead of theirs. Day 3. Silence. Until a message came through James. They're in a motel off Route 7, he said over the phone. They're trying to buy time. See if you'll reconsider. Tanya's panicking. Mark's quieter. Let them sit in it, I said. He didn't argue. The motel they chose was one of those places with buzzing lights and a vending machine that never worked. May and I drove by once, casually. They didn't see us. Tanya sat on the curb, yelling into a phone. Her hair a mess, her robe no longer silk, just polyester regret. Mark was smoking, something he hadn't done since college. He looked like a man stripped of his own armor. No sunglasses, no bravado, just a phone clutched tight and a bank account he couldn't touch anymore. Because I'd closed everything, frozen the joint emergency fund, transferred the pension to a private annuity under my sole control, even canceled the spare card Tanya used for groceries. They were truly on their own now. They'd never thought this day would come. Because I had always forgiven, always fixed things, always been there when life got inconvenient. But now? Now they got to experience something I knew far too well, being left with the mess someone else made. May said I should feel guilty, but I didn't. I felt honest. They weren't homeless. They weren't starving. They had money. Tanya still had her influencer sponsorships, and Mark could always go back to work if he remembered how. They just didn't have me. And that absence, that cutoff, was the only thing that finally made them notice how much I'd given. The house wasn't theirs. The money wasn't theirs. The story they told about helping me transition had collapsed. I didn't announce my boundary. I didn't threaten it. I just enforced it. And now they were drifting motel to motel, waiting for a miracle. But all the miracles in their life had been me. They just hadn't noticed until I stopped answering. And I wasn't picking up again. It had been a week since they tried to come home to a house that no longer wanted them. The calls had stopped, the texts dried up. Even the fake apology emails, clearly typed by Tanya, signed with both their names, faded into silence when they realized no reply was coming. I spent my mornings reading on the porch, crosswords with May in the afternoons, and lavender baths at night. No one barged in. No one asked me for money. No one sighed loudly while I talked, like I was an inconvenience in my own living room. The quiet was not empty, it was healing. Then, one afternoon, while May was teaching me how to plant mint in a pot by the window, she pointed her trowel toward the sidewalk. "They're back." I stood without saying a word. From the cottage porch, we could see them through the hedges. Mark, Tanya, and the kids, all piled into a rented SUV. Clothes crammed in the back. Tanya's eyes bloodshot. Mascara smudged in that way that wasn't about fashion, but defeat. Mark stood in front of what used to be our house, now freshly painted. The new owner's name on the mailbox, curtains already changed. He just stood there, holding something. A photo. It was the one of us, me and him on his 10th birthday, eating ice cream by the pool. I remembered the day. He'd told me I was his favorite person in the whole world. He held it like it had answers. Then he walked to the front porch and placed it carefully under the flower pot. A peace offering. Or a guilt monument. Tanya didn't move to join him. She stayed in the car, staring at her phone like it could conjure a reset button. The kids were quiet. Not bored. Not whining. Just quiet in the way kids get when they realize something grown-up has broken. Mark looked around once, up at the roofline, across the windows, and I swear I saw his face change. Not from anger. Not even sadness. It was understanding. Late, but real. He turned back to the SUV, drove off. No knock, no note, just the photo and the silence they couldn't break. May looked at me. "You all right?" I nodded, eyes dry. "I'm better than all right."